If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.
Folks, if you've listened to the Heard Tell program, you've heard our friend Gabriella Hoffman, but you need to make sure you're checking out her podcast, District of Conservation. It's a podcast exploring the nuances of true conservation efforts from DC and beyond. From topic discussions to exclusive interviews with conservation and energy newsmakers, Gabriella keeps listeners appraised of the latest news stories while elevating important voices. Listen to District of Conservation on Apple Podcasts or wherever podcasts are played. Folks, you've heard of Ethan Brown on the Heard Tell show a couple of different times, but if you're interested in learning about how to discuss things like climate change without all the politics and doom and gloom, head over to his podcast, The Sweaty Penguin. Sweaty Penguin is a late-night comedy-style climate podcast working to add nuance, critical thinking, humor, and hope to the climate conversation. They got over 100 episodes already, breaking down weekly news stories and specific topics, from the vanilla to the ADHD to the international accountability to orangutans. Yes, I know, it's a comedy thing, so just go with it. But each time, exploring different ways we can make progress on these issues while still helping the economy, health, security, and everything else we care about. Feel overwhelmed, exhausted, or excluded by today's climate change discourse? This is the podcast for you. Find The Sweaty Penguin wherever you get your podcasts or at www.thesweatypenguin.com.
With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, when we say across the street and around the world, we mean it. We just haven't been covering around the world a lot because it's been so totally nuts here in the States. We're going to do that today. We're going to go overseas, way over yonder, Romania, the Black Sea area. We're going to talk a little bit with Antonia-Laura. She is a Young Voices contributor. She's a Fulbright person down in Georgetown. Go look that up, kids. They don't just hand those out. That means she's real smart. And she'll be back in the States soon, but you're still over there. How are you, ma'am? Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to be back home for a little while now, but of course, I'm also very excited to be back to DC. And it was a great summer in Romania and a lot of events. So I'm happy to discuss them from a Black Sea security perspective today with you.
Yeah, let's start there with the nomenclature, because this is a part of the world that Western media doesn't do a great job of covering. They airdrop in when there's a big story, they leave. Obviously, the Black Sea and, just to the west, the Balkan area, this is important in world history. It's important in modern history. When it's covered now, it's pretty much been the Russia-Ukraine stuff, not unjustifiably. That's just kind of how it works. But that's one little corner of this area. Let's start with Romania, though. Let's start with your home, because it's been a busy summer there and a busy spring. Just had a presidential election. And like a lot of other countries in that area, it was very much right, nationalist, a little more friendly to Russia versus not friendly to Russia. There's some themes there that were universal to a lot of other countries in that area, but there was some unique Romanian twist. Just give people kind of the thumbnail for the American and international audience of what's been going on in Romania the last few months.
So we have had the resumed presidential elections happening in 18th of May. The winner and now our newly elected president, Nicu Jordan, is a pro-European figure. He's a former mathematician. He was trained at Sorbonne in French. In the French Republic, he was very successful in his academic career, and his credentials, of course, are very strong. Then he moved into the civil society organization, was a very popular activist for environmental issues, and then he founded what now is one of the strongest opposition liberal opposition parties that don't have anything to do with the let's say heirs of the communist parties. So totally new, totally based on Romania as being more tied to the European agenda. So that was that, but it was a long road, I would say, factoring in the fact that just a few months ago, in December 2024, we have had the presidential elections of Romania annulled by the Constitutional Court on the basis of massive foreign interference in our electoral process. Of course, I will not speculate on that too much, because it was the independent body of the Constitutional Court that took this vote to have this unprecedented decision with unanimity, although it's a very I would say well represented body with people that are named, that have very strong judicial credentials and are named by different bodies in the Romanian system, so as to ensure these checks and balances. This decision led to social unrest on behalf of the supporters of Călin Georgescu, the candidate that I like to present him to my American friends as the product of Russian money that are very well displayed and very well positioned on a Chinese social media platform. We all know it, it's TikTok. And that succeeded in just 2 weeks before these elections to win them. But the whole process was very sketchy, because he didn't report any of the funding. He was supported by some paramilitary organizations that wanted to literally overthrow the Romanian constitutional order, and this is all documented by judicial bodies as we speak. There are some things still being investigated by the law enforcement authorities. And after that, after this decision of annulling the presidential elections, the process was started fresh with new candidates, including one of the political heirs of this Călin Georgescu figure, which was George Simion, the typical candidate that really wanted to show himself as fitting into the MAGA mold, trying to show off that he's part of this Make Europe Great Again wave. Obviously, the Romanian people didn't buy that. The Romanian people are one of the most anti-Russian peoples in the eastern flank of NATO. Our antibodies for Russian propaganda are very strong. So our citizens really were able to see past that image of seeming very close to the Trump establishment, and saw that behind that was in fact a politician that was so strongly tied not only with the Kremlin narratives, but actually was known for the fact that both the Ukrainian authorities and the Moldovan authorities decided to ban him from entering these countries because of the suspicion that they hold that he is a pro-Moscow proxy. So that was that. The runoff between them, although the pro-European candidate, now the president, left in this March with a significant disadvantage, like 40% to 20%. Then in the runoff, he went back on top and he won with a comfortable, more than comfortable margin. And now we are in a moment in which a new government was formed, a government that has the clear mandate to restore the health of our financing system because we have a very severe deficit. And on top of that, to undergo some significant reforms in our defense sector to make Romania not necessarily great again, but greater in the relation with our Euro-Atlantic partners, with United States, with the European Union, and so on. But it's, of course, a very challenging period still, because this government has left in the opposition alone the right-wing extremist parties. There is no liberal opposition party right now. All the pro-European mainstream parties are grouped in this governmental architecture, and they are trying to undergo some reforms. But as you know, reforms in government don't always serve you well in the purpose of being politically popular. So that will be I think that is the wide overview of what Romania is going on through right now. And in terms of foreign affairs, I can tell you that we can see Romania back in the game, in the regional game, with Romania being very involved into revitalizing the position it has in the Black Sea region. But not only that, the Romanian president did some delegations in Germany, in Austria, to pledge that Romania will be a good partner for countries that want to invest in Romania, to bring businesses here. So this is I see it as a very important part of his agenda to promote Romania as a good investment place. But another challenge right now will be to make sure that the relation with the United States, we have a strategic partnership with Washington, will be secured. And in that regard, I'm looking forward to see the Romanian diplomacy being more active into securing a meeting with Donald Trump, hopefully not in 2026, but this year. So that will be something to look out.
And you can see strategically, look, one of our things is always follow the money. Europe is putting a lot of business and political muscle into Romania right now because of the wider Black Sea stuff we will get to in a minute. Rheinmetall, the German defense giant, just announced they're going to be doing a lot more inside of Romania directly. Romania already has the largest NATO base at NCAB. But beyond that, they're partnering with the Austrians with the Neptune Deep gas field, which could be a real game changer. That's not just money and economic for Romania, but of course, Western Europe is very dependent on Russian natural gas. So that's something that they're looking at. There's a lot of moving parts of the EU and NATO wanting to partner up with Romania, both monetarily and defense-wise. And all of that movement is under the umbrella of Russia, which it has been for years. But the new player, and this is something you've been writing about, is not only geopolitically, but also in the cyber sphere and things like this. China has very much inserted itself into the Black Sea region in places like Romania and Georgia and these other countries this all goes together, and the money and the investment and the defense posturing just shows how that's all coming together.
Unfortunately, when you talk with policymakers from either Brussels, Paris, or Washington, when you talk about the Black Sea region, you are not necessarily thinking of other bad actor than Russia. But what the last years have brought, particularly with the development of the Belt and Road Initiative that goes hand in hand, I would say, as a soft power tool to implementing Xi Jinping's new global security initiative, we have seen some very concrete developments into China becoming an emergent player in the region. Where I'm coming from, I would almost make a strong case. I've made it in Romanian media that China should be seen in a very clear-eyed manner by our policymakers as an emerging threat to our security environment. And why is that? First of all, because it is widely known for its theft of intellectual property, its industrial espionage, its cyber offensive capabilities through which they try to collect intelligence on our officials with the scope of limiting our political autonomy when it comes to issues that are more sensitive, maybe with Taiwan. And not only that, but the Dragon Bear Alliance, as some analysts call it, which is the alliance between Beijing and Moscow that has operated in a very clear way since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. At the last NATO summit during Joe Biden's presidency, which is the NATO 75th anniversary summit in Washington, the leaders clearly agreed that China is a decisive enabler of Russia's war machine. It is still unclear what are the Chinese objectives towards the war in Ukraine, but if we just look at the facts, we can see that it's a subtle effort of Chinese presence in the wider discussions on Ukraine's reconstruction. I would foresee China being very cautious to make sure to capitalize on opportunity and transform Ukraine's reconstruction into a critical infrastructure diplomacy site, although they are not contributing with anything in spite of their global position to the resolve of this conflict. And they are trying to be seen almost as these would-be peacemakers, but they're not using the leverage that they have in any way towards Moscow to stop the shootings, to stop the war. Moreover, we cannot overlook the fact that we've had the two leaders, Xi Jinping and Putin, sign just days before Ukraine was invaded by the Russian army in February 2022, the emergence of a strategic partnership that it's very suggestively called No Limits Partnership. So we have on the one hand these economic diplomacy and coercive economic practices that China is doing around the world and that are giving us some insight on what Chinese as an economic partner is. We have the alliance with Russia that is worrisome, and we have maybe scooping a little bit from all these two dynamics. We have China building the largest port in Anaklia right now, which will be the largest port in the Black Sea. owned by a Chinese-led consortium. We have Turkey, which is a NATO country, but is also associated with the BRICS group. And they are, again, involved with the Chinese in bringing together the Middle Corridor interconnectivity agenda with the Belt and Road flagship initiative. So, drawing the line, yes, I very much see China's role in the Black Sea region as something that cannot be overlooked by the Euro-Atlantic community. And I, from my position, I try to convince our Romanian authorities to make this case to bring the attention of the American policymakers, because the US has a Black Sea Security Act in 2023, which was passed on a bipartisan agenda, but we haven't seen actually a Black Sea security strategy that is firm on behalf of the US for our region. And it's all the more time to build momentum, not only looking at the end of the war and of Russia being ever so the responsible of transforming this region into a war theater, but also China becoming more involved. So in that regard, I'm very proud to say that Romania, unlike other countries, has been very on board with the whole spectrum of US-led efforts for de-risking with Beijing when it comes to critical infrastructure. Since 2019, the Bucharest government made this pledge and acted upon it to take away any Huawei equipment from our 5G networks. We successfully kicked China out of our big infrastructure bids. And we have significantly downplayed our political role in the now 14+1 China and the Central Eastern European political cooperation format. So I'm not worried about my country, but I think I'm worried about our politicians missing an opportunity to become more of an entrepreneurial voice in the region for downplaying China's influence in Europe, because China's influence in Europe goes through the Black Sea, whether we like it or not. And I think it's something that should be under the attention of both people in Washington and Bucharest alike.
And the reason for this is because there's really three phases to how China's using their tech and ability for their geopower. Because one, you mentioned the infrastructure. They're doing that all over the Southeast Asia. They're doing that in Africa now. They come in, they offer to build infrastructure, but then they know that they can, use that for leverage going forward. But then on the tech front, there's two ways they do this. One is the cyber stuff and the online. But like you said, the hardware with Huawei and these other countries, Romania's blocked it. The UK's tried to block some of this stuff. The EU has spent 5 years. You've wrote about this. We'll link to the piece. The EU spent 5 years trying to cut off the 5G network movement from China, and yet 17 out of 23 EU countries is reliant on Chinese tech, hardware, and software both. This is something not only for the Black Sea region, but Europe and the world. And what you just said is the important part, because if the EU or if America doesn't offer them an alternative, they've got to have this technology from somewhere. And by default, China has an open door for it. And that's something the policymakers, especially maybe some folks in the Trump administration, for example, long term, maybe they're missing that piece of it. Is like, this is not either or. People are going to get their 5G somewhere. We need to offer an alternative if you want to keep it from China.
Definitely. And what's more to it is that we have now countries like Spain that landed very important public contracts for having wiretaps for the judicial authorities that are managed by Huawei. We have the Hungarian army that has landed a very important public contract to Chinese economic operators to do some maintenance project on their railways. So it's a trend that I think it's not giving as much attention as it deserves. And unfortunately, we also have a solution, because just a few weeks ago, we've had the NATO summit in The Hague. I was a bit disappointed by the fact that we didn't have China mentioned in the final communique that was very short. And I can see the reasoning behind that. Like, you would not want a lot of stuff to be put together and to have a consensus being endangered from emerging, especially with the Trump administration right now. But I think an opportunity was missed, because we have now the requirement of 5%, that it's comprised of 3.5% for core defense, 1.5% for security related spendings, including critical infrastructure protection, military mobility, and others that are not part of the core defense. This 5% is a requirement that NATO countries need to invest for with the horizon of 2035, the famous 5% for Article 5. But I think that when it comes to this 1.5%, the US diplomacy in partnership with Eastern flank countries, including mine, that have been very on board and clear-eyed about the China threat. An example here being the new head of the European diplomacy, Mrs. Kaja Kallas, the vice president of the Commission and the High Representative for European foreign and security policy. So I would use those 1.5% to create, to boost NATO's resilience when it comes to China. And you can do so by investing in cybersecurity capabilities, but not only that, critical infrastructure, screening mechanisms for foreign investment, and a bunch of other stuff, because economic security is also the job of NATO. And I would want a transatlantic front that it's emerging on that issue. Unfortunately, at least in the EU, we are far from having a united position on what China is. We are far more ahead than we were a few years ago, but still a lot can be done to strengthen EU's resilience in relation to China's assertiveness.
Yeah, and let's talk about one of the major players in the Black Sea region that is at the middle and the crossroads of a lot of the EU-NATO issues as far as the rest of the world goes. Let's talk about Turkey for a minute. You wrote about it recently. We'll link to this piece as well. But the Western media, especially American media, does a horrible job of covering Turkey. It's I'm trying to think of a way to explain this in a sentence or two, because it's kind of hard, because Turkey's very complicated. But traditionally, the Turks, going all the way back to the Ottomans, their theory of the world is put ourselves in the middle of everything and then go from there. The problem is the Erdogan Turkey theory on everything is put ourselves in the middle of everything and go from there. And they're in the middle of everything and they go from there, good, bad, or indifferent. They like things to go through them, and they like to be a power broker. And the reality of it is, geographically, they're at the center of this. NATO, they like to play both sides against the middle. EU, they like to play both sides against the middle. This is just the reality, but that also means if you're going to have transactional leadership like a Donald Trump administration, Erdogan's going to have to get something for him to do other things, but the EU needs him, NATO needs him. We tend to just cover them like they're a normal EU country, or if it suits people, they'll cover them as a Middle Eastern country. They're neither.
Support American-made tariff-free clothing with American Giant with American Giant. They aren't affected by tariffs because their clothing products never left the U.S. Get 20% off your first order when you use promo code STAPLE20 at american-giant.com.
They're Turkey. They're unique, and you have to address them as such and understand their position to really understand why all roads on a lot of this stuff in some way, shape, form, or fashion is going to run through Turkey.
I will start by paraphrasing one of my favorite political leaders of all time, Margaret Thatcher, by saying that when you are in the middle, of course, it creates a lot of opportunity, especially for a middle power like Turkey. But being in the middle also means that you are most exposed to get kicked both from the left and from the right. And I think with Turkey's poor economic status right now, this clearly shows that. But as you already mentioned, their hedging in the foreign policy arena is very intimately connected to their history and to their cultural identity of being this bridge between the East and the West, between Europe and Asia, which geographically it stands. I am particularly sad of the fact that Turkey's road to the European Union didn't materialize. I would think that at least from a foreign and security policy perspective, they would have a lot to put on the table. They have a very strong military power, manpower, capabilities, I would say even technologically relevant capabilities that the European Union might use. Luckily for us, but also I think for them, and this might also come as no surprise given the fact that EU is trying to build some insurances on the potential US disengagement from Europe. And this can mean many things. It can mean just withdrawing some troops, being more politically ignorant towards the EU security needs, and so on. We have seen Turkey actually join the SAFE instrument of the European Commission, which means that Turkey will cooperate with the European Union in terms of buying more equipment together. And from that, I would say that there is an opportunity right now to include Turkey, which is the maritime security power in the region that is more closely aligned to the Euro-Atlantic values than all the others that maybe not necessarily have such a good military might and have some deficiencies, and we have to see them as they are, including my own country. We have this new European Union strategic approach for the Black Sea. And among those objectives, we have the creation of the EU Maritime Security Hub that Romania aspires to host. It's unclear what will be the exact tasks of this Maritime Security Hub, but I'm expecting activities in the field of intelligence sharing, coordinating ourselves better for policing that maritime region, but also harmonizing some of our standards for creating more interconnectivity projects. So not only about the maritime domain, but I would see, and I would argue that the Romanian president should be, again, entrepreneurial and say that if Romania were to host this hub, and I think it totally deserves, on the virtue that Romania was the country that advocated in Brussels for a EU strategy for the Black Sea region, that if it will become the host country. It will invite Turkish experts to come in this hub and to participate in the activities of this hub. And not only them, but also Ukraine, because Ukraine at this point has made so much for the Black Sea security agenda. And just by remembering how the Ukraine missiles and drone strikes severely damaged Russia's Black Sea fleet, I think that it's just that alone is a reason to invite them as EU candidate countries to be part of this hub. I think that we have seen Turkey for a long time being very skeptical towards the Euro-Atlantic presence in the Black Sea region. They are positioned well, not only in the geography dimension of the conversation, but also they have the Montreal Convention that gives them power over the straits, and they have exercised it during this war by closing the straits for the military ships. And they really have this skepticism of transforming the Black Sea into a Euro-Atlantic field. But I think that right now, with the Russian threat that is so persistent, coupled with the possible US disengagement from the region, the sound alternative is to create a regional security community in the Black Sea region. And we have the demining initiative that it's online since last year, with Bulgaria and Romania and Turkey working together to demine the Black Sea. And that is in itself a victory, but I think we should build more momentum on that and increase our own self-sufficiency, our own deterrence capabilities when it comes to a common threat that we see now very clear, which is Russia, and work more together in the region. Because I think this is also something that would show not only to our citizens, but to our adversaries and allies alike, that the value of this region is seen by the players in the region first, and then it's augmented by the presence of like-minded nations that I hope will join in protecting the Black Sea region.
Yeah, and this is a region that, just pull it up on a map. Geographically, this is always going to be important. Istanbul and the Bosphorus are not going to move. Like that's going to be there. There's one way in and there, and there's one way out. But what can change, and I think what we're seeing with things like the maritime stuff you're talking about, the security pacts, we don't know where Russia, Ukraine is going, but we know they're not going to be friends anytime soon. And even though the current conflict is going to get some kind of a settlement at some point, that is what it is. And you can see with the EU and to a lesser and NATO and the other countries involved, and even countries like Belarus that is very much aligned with Putin, but they also understand that they got to kind of keep one hand free for everybody else at the same time. You're seeing the post-Ukraine Russian current conflict, although it will always go on in some way. You're really starting to see planning and realignment for when that's done. And the geography isn't going to change, but the economics and the military power shift can change. And that's the undercurrent of what people need to watch for going forward when it comes to the Black Sea area, isn't it?
I think that we have seen this dynamic, at least in our part of the world, as being overlooked not only since 2022, but since 2014, really, when Russia took Crimea. And already since then, I would argue the Black Sea region has become a playing field of the Russian regime to project power in Europe and disturb our security environment. And what did NATO do then was a step too little to assure the security of our environment. Why do I say that? At the summit in 2016, we have seen the eastern flank of NATO popping up as this region that needs more investment from NATO, and they created this two-tier forward presence system in the eastern flank. So you had the enhanced forward presence in the Baltic area and Poland, whereas in the southern portion of the eastern flank, just a tailored forward presence. And this created some asymmetry. There are a lot of reasons why that happened. It's far easier, I would say, because of shared historical trauma to create a regional security community in the northern part of the eastern flank. We have seen the Poles and the Baltics being very active together, doing a lot of military cooperation, having a similar threat perception when it comes to Russia, which you didn't see in our part of the eastern flank, and maybe that contributed to. Maybe there were some reasoning on not provoking Russia, being too involved in the Black Sea, but that was done. But it created a power vacuum that was manifested a lot in the past almost decade now. And I think that we are in a high risk of seeing this southern part of the eastern flank of NATO becoming this almost soft underbelly of the eastern theater. And I think this is something that that deserves more attention from NATO, starting, I would say, with the United States, that from an institutional point of view already signaled that it cares about the region. Obviously, we didn't see it materialize that much, but it first has to start at home by the strategic responsibility of the countries that are bordering the Black Sea.
And history tells us, look, if you kept up with your history of this area, none of this surprises you. Russia's the dominant instigator here. Georgia and Chechnya in the 90s, Georgia in 2008 and 2009, then Crimea in 2014 that you just talked about, and then Ukraine. There was a clear pattern of behavior that this is what was going to happen if you were paying attention. What should people in the West be doing to try to keep up with an area of the world like the Black Sea, where you're talking 5, 6, 7 different countries with very, very different cultures, but they have a joint regional desire that they've got a lot of overlapping interest? You have Russia and China as bad faith actors trying to take advantage. For the American and international audience, how do they balance that history and the current events they're seeing and try to keep up with this a little better and understand that, like, oh no, when the EU's trying to do something, they've got to keep an eye on this. And when Russia's doing things and China's doing things, this is all one part of the larger global affairs story. What would you tell the audience here in America and internationally how to keep up with this in a more productive way, especially in a very confusing environment, especially with news and social media?
That's a great question. I think that it's important to keep up with what's happening here by following multiple sources, political elites, but also independent media, to look at what more than one voice has to offer. There are some interesting newsletters that I follow on a regular basis. Georgian media is very nice. The Georgian independent media, Kiev Independent, Romania has a very rich independent media sector as well, like G4 Media, for example, is something that I check on a regular basis. But in terms of what policy actions can be done by lawmakers, I would say that we have an opportunity right now to see the EU Maritime Security Hub as this hub that will create a regional security community in the Black Sea region if we will decide not to stop it at the gates of the European Union and invite countries like Ukraine and Turkey to join. I would say the second thing that should be done would be to support the Moldovan and Georgian civil societies in increasing their resilience against the Russian information war. And three, it really boils down to China's plans for the region. I think that through initiatives like the Three Seas Initiative, which is a format of cooperation between Eastern Flank countries and the United States, with some strategic partners from Western Europe, Japan, South Korea, to invest in interconnectivity projects in the region, because interconnectivity will drive economic growth, and such an interconnectivity agenda that is bolstered by Euro-Atlantic values and emerges as a common project between like-minded nations that have a similar threat perception regarding Russia in fields like energy, digitalization, and transportation will make us more resilient, but also will make sure that we have a credible counter-offer to Chinese adversarial foreign investments that have not only this business element, but when it comes to China, you most likely, because of the structure of their system, have also an intelligence security element connected to that. Because of how the Chinese society is structured and of the laws they have in place and of them being an authoritarian system, they have this line that is blurred between business actors and state actors, whereas you would see Chinese corporations becoming really a tool for China to achieve certain foreign policy objectives. So interconnectivity, working more together regionally, including by a more responsible way of seeing our defense investments at home, starting with my own country. I will not shy away from saying that we should invest more, especially in modernizing our naval forces and ensuring the fact that our military has innovative solutions as well. And this can be done also in partnership with Ukraine and their defense industrial base. And third one, I would say bringing transatlantic cooperation into the region through a win-win pragmatic approach, and it can start with investment. I would only add that Romania, in the field of energy at least, is, as you mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, is doing a lot, not only with the Neptune Deep project, but also with becoming the first country that will have the SMRs, small modular reactors, that will go online in 2029 and will assure a level of energy sufficiency that will make us exporters, and with exports comes not only money, but also some security guarantees, because we will be able to help our neighbors become less reliant on Russian gas. And those SMRs are made by an American company, and it's a very clear way of how transatlantic cooperation in the region can work and can create win-win benefits for all of us. So that would be, I would say, a Western Euro-Atlantic to-do list for the region that I hope will be implemented soon.
You just hit on something important. I think this is a good way to round off this conversation. You're talking about building up strong civil societies for these countries, especially the ones that are formerly under the boot heel of the old Soviet, and trying to find their way under the new Russia, caught between the new Russia and the new EU. I think you just said something really important that we don't talk about, and it's universal to almost every country because, look, the internet made everything global, whether you like it or not. Commerce and Amazon made everything global, whether you like it or not. You live in a global world. But you also have places like Russia who use nationalism to pitch subjugation. So at the same time, these countries, whether it's America or Romania or wherever, because we're struggling with this, you have to have this strong sense of healthy patriotism and love of your own country. But you also have to make sure that doesn't devolve into the darker parts of nationalism that history teaches us leads to all sorts of bad stuff. And you have to figure out a way to function in a global economy. That's a really great academic exercise when you're in a classroom to try to talk people through. It's so hard to do in real life. And it's really hard to do in an environment where the most engaged people in news and media are usually the ones with the most agenda, because otherwise they wouldn't be the most engaged. I think that's really kind of the struggle of our time, whether you're in the Baltic region or the American region or South America or Southeast Asia or wherever. How do you have a healthy love for your own people in your own country and still figure out how to be a global citizen that functions on the right side? And I don't mean political right. I mean the moral right, the historical right, doing the right things for the global world and for you and your family and community. I think that's really the struggle of our time, and we don't talk about it, but that's kind of at the heart of all this geopolitics we just got done discussing, whether you're in Romania or you're in America or wherever else.
True. And I would say that it's all the more the time for pro-European, pro-transatlantic conservative voices to take back this motive of patriotism from the pro-Kremlin political muppets of Putin, to take back this motive of healthy patriotism and to show that, at least in my part of the world, being a patriot can never be in the same sentence with being a person that is tied to Russia, whether it's through financial means or through political ambiguity or through strategic irresponsibility. For me, especially since I am a former history student and I trained during my university years to become a history teacher, think that you cannot let these false patriots to occupy the informational space. And to guard that, you need to have credible, sound, conservative voices that will expose them.
And how do we do that, Professor? Because that's and you know, the Western order, we use the terms liberal and conservative sort of interchangeably on some of that stuff, but just the people who understand, people who want more freedom, not less freedom, and the people who want less freedom so that they have more power. I think you kind of start with that metric first, and then you get into the policy and the politics and the economics and all the rest of it after that. If you just kind of stand back and go like, okay, is this going to make more people free and prosperous or less people free and prosperous? And then you kind of take that function, whether it's dealing with Russia or the EU or whatever the complicated matter of the day is, kind of take a basic principle, hold that up to it and go, well, let me start there, and then I'll start parsing through all this information.
The authorities should start with preserving the memory, the historical memory, and talking to the young generation about what communism and Nazism meant for Europe. The Czechs just banned communism as an ideology. I think it's a great example. Romania has banned it in 2006. We need more investment into education, and not only formal education, but also museums, cultural influencers being given the space to interact with the young generation, to develop these antibodies that are needed for a resilient society that will not let the proxies of Russia to tap into those nostalgism of the communist eras. And in addition to that, I think that it's a wider discussion on how we can make citizens trust the institutions better. And there is not one size fits all approach, but I think it should start through some minimal principles like transparency, respect for the money of the taxpayers, institutional proactiveness to the needs of the citizen. This should be the bare minimum for a social contract that is fair with the citizen and that will make him trust his fellow public servants in a way that will not let him be so easily trapped into the rhetoric of the people that want to make the apology of the communist regime, of the Soviet influence eras. And that should be the first steps, really.
And you just hit on the problem. The internal struggle is going to be dictatorships and oligarchies are one size fits all, and they always work. And representative democracies is messy and hard and really hard to get people to do. And that's the struggle, the eternal struggle. And you articulate it so well. Antonio, we so appreciate it. That is a much deeper conversation. I'm going to have you back, and we're going to have it at some point in the near future. But until then, and we see you again, let folks know how they can keep up with you, what you got going on, and how they can follow you and your work.
Well, I mostly post all my stuff on my LinkedIn. Just follow me there, Antonia-Laura Poop, and I plan on starting a newsletter soon. So I will probably announce that in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, good stuff. We'll also put up a profile with her Young Voices page because that's one-stop shopping for a lot of her stuff. We'll send all the links. Antonio, so appreciate your time. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
All the music on Her Tell is provided under a creative content license from monstercat.com.
Somos la máquina.
When your company earns unlimited 2% cash back on all purchases with Capital One, that's serious business. So Stephen at SandCloud got a serious business card, the Spark Cash Plus card from Capital One.
We used our 2% cash back to help build our retail presence.
Savvy, Stephen.
And we get big purchasing power, so our business can spend more and earn more.
The Spark Cash Plus card from Capital One. What's in your wallet?
Terms and conditions apply. Find out more at CapitalOne.com/SparkCashPlus.
Folks, if you've listened to the Heard Tell program, you've heard our friend Gabriella Hoffman, but you need to make sure you're checking out her podcast, District of Conservation. It's a podcast exploring the nuances of true conservation efforts from D.C. and beyond. From topic discussions to exclusive interviews with conservation and energy newsmakers, Gabriella keeps listeners appraised of the latest news stories while elevating important voices. Listen to District of Conservation on Apple Podcasts or wherever podcasts are played. Folks, you've heard of Ethan Brown on the Heard Tell show a couple of different times, but if you're interested in learning about how to discuss things like climate change without all the politics and doom and gloom, head over to his podcast, The Sweaty Penguin. Sweaty Penguin is a late-night comedy-style climate podcast working to add nuance, critical thinking, humor, and hope to the climate conversation. They got over 100 episodes already, breaking down weekly news stories and specific topics, from the vanilla to the ADHD to the international accountability to orangutans. Yes, I know, it's a comedy thing, so just go with it. But each time, exploring different ways we can make progress on these issues while still helping the economy, health, security, and everything else we care about. Feel overwhelmed, exhausted, or excluded by today's climate change discourse? This is the podcast for you. Find The Sweaty Penguin wherever you get your podcasts or at www.thesweatypenguin.com.